Good evening. Good evening, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel discussion, which is a first for World Music Institute. And World Music Institute is a nonprofit performing arts organization dedicated to enriching lives through the arts and building bridges between people of all cultures and traditions. I'm Gabby Sappington and have the honor and pleasure to serve as the executive director of WMI. And I'm very thrilled that our panelists have agreed to participate and to share their experience and their insights into the fascinating topic of where sound meets science. The idea to offer such an informative panel discussion on this topic actually came up as we, under the leadership and with the support of our panel leader, Chandrika Tandon, curated a performance series titled Sacred Sounds of Healing that features artists who celebrate and promote the transformative power of music and sounds from diverse spiritual and ethnic traditions. We wanted to go beyond the presentation of musical performances and therefore invited scientists, artists, and cultural experts to join in this interactive panel discussion to explore the intersection of science, sound, and song when it comes to the topic of healing. We are very fortunate that our panelists have agreed to participate, and I sincerely and personally thank you for doing so and giving of your time. It's absolutely impossible to capture everybody's full background, honors, and accomplishments in this place because you want to hear them talk. So I will give brief introductions, and I encourage all of you to look them up online to get the full details of the many accomplishments and skills that they have. The conversation will actually be led by Chandrika Tandon, who is a globally recognized Grammy Award-winning artist, business leader, and humanitarian with deep knowledge of Vedic traditions. Her stated mission is to elevate human happiness through music and education, working on the dual prongs of emotional and economic well-being. Chandrika has won a Grammy Award in Best New Age, Ambient, or Chant Album category, and she's been nominated twice on top of that. Her music draws on ancient Vedic chants that have sound healing impact, blending Sanskrit words with Indian classical music. In addition to her musical life, she's also a trustee of NYU, chair of the NYU Tandon School of Engineering Board, and serves as a governor of the New York Academy of Sciences, among other leadership roles. Chandrika's vision, her passion for, and the study of applying sound towards healing are really the driving forces behind our entire Sacred Sounds of Healing series and this panel discussion. She's joined by Lisa Sokolov, who is all the way at the end, who is an experimental recording artist, composer, and a professor at NYU Tisch School of the Arts, who has sung at jazz festivals and concert halls all across the world. She studies the ancient art of sacred Jewish improvisational singing and is the originator of embodied voice work, a method used in music therapy, arts education, and human potential work. Her book, Embodied Voice Work, Beyond Singing, is published by Barcelona Publishers in 2020. We have some of them out there in case you want to purchase them. And she lectures internationally at universities, institutes, and conferences. To Lisa's left is Dr. Concetta Tomaino, who is the executive director and co-founder of Institute for Music and Neurologic Function. Her work has advanced the state-of-the-art and science of music therapy for individuals suffering the effects of brain trauma, including stroke, or who are afflicted with such degenerative neurological diseases as Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and other forms of dementia. Dr. Tomaino holds a Master's and Doctor of Arts in Music Therapy from New York University and is the recipient of multiple honors and awards, most notably the Award of Accomplishment for Music Therapists for Peace at the United Nations. Alexandre Tannous is an ethnomusicologist, a sound researcher, a sound therapist, and the founder of the ResonantMind Collective. A Mellon Fellow from Columbia University, he holds 4 degrees in music and brings decades of experience as a performer, composer, conductor, educator, and lecturer on the transformative and therapeutic power of sound. For the past 25 years, he has been researching the therapeutic and esoteric properties of sound from 3 different perspectives: Western scientific, Eastern philosophical, and shamanic societal beliefs, to gain a deeper understanding of how and to what extent sound has been used to affect human consciousness. This search has led him to the intersection where art, science, philosophy, and spirituality come together. So, as I said, it is like a highly, highly experienced and knowledgeable panel, and we are so grateful that they are here to share their insights and their lived experiences around the topic where sound meets science. We will record this conversation and we'll share it on our YouTube channel for future reference, as well as for additional sharing among the community. I also, before we get started, want to mention the musical performances that I had said are part of the Sacred Sounds of Healing series. On Friday, November 21, Chandrika Tandon will perform at Symphony Space in Manhattan, and on Saturday, February 21, the Yuval Ron Ensemble, featuring Sufi master, musician Khawaja Erari, will unite the sacred musical traditions of Sufism and Judaism into an unusual musical, mystical celebration at Judson Memorial Church. We would love to see you there, and we also have an info table up front with more information about upcoming programming and how to sign up for a newsletter, and we would love to stay in touch. But now, it's time to hand over the microphone to Chandrika Tandon, because she will expertly lead the conversation and get us started. Thank you.
So thank you all for being here, and thank you very much for being this amazing panel that we have here today. Before we get started, Lisa would like to do a small invocation. Whatever.
Hopefully something good will sing through me, making my mystery clearer. Touch the soil with my hands, making a mystery clearer. In the thicket, he lay in the thicket, without food, without shelter, without food, without shelter. In the thicket, he lay in the thicket to live one day with only the word. Making the mystery song, sing, say day. Making the mystery song, say day. Making the mystery clearer, sweet, so simbiava, sambe, so way more.
Thank you, Lisa. Before we go forward, I would like to just take a moment to ask the audience, how many of you are singers or in the space of sound and music? And how many of you, if you're not singers or, are just interested or doing something related to music? Okay, so we have pretty much 100% of you here who are connected to sound and music in some way. So this is the format we'll use. We're going to spend the first 45 minutes or 50 minutes having a conversation here, and then we'll turn it up to questions, comments, anything you want to do to add to this conversation. I want to just give a little bit of background as to why this subject matters to me. I've been in the business world for a very long time, and about 25 years ago, for me, it was a epiphany that I had, a crisis of spirit, as I call it, when I said I wanted to get back to things that made me joyful. And music was a big part of that joy, because I sang before I could speak, and music was a very big part of that. And when I started to find song, I found silence. And when I found silence, I found love, and I found service. So my entire life's journey has been shaped by music. In a very profound way, my entire life took a turn in a very different direction after my going back and engaging with music, not to perform, not to win a Grammy, none of that. It was simply to connect with that deepest sound. And we'll go. So this journey, whether you call it healing, it was transformational. It's made me, I sign everything love, light, laughter, because for me, music is love. Music brings the light within, lights up the light, and it brings the joy. So it did something very big. And that's the reason now we've got this, while we're talking about song and science, it really is song, science, and spirit. And that is the conversation we are going to have with these people. So let me just turn it out. And we have 3 different people, and even though they have very different backgrounds, but in a sense, each one saying something about this. I mean, Lisa comes in and talks about the voice that is basically the way of the body remembering and speaking. And I'm going to put it in very simple terms in my way. And Conchetta is talking about music as medicine, because she's used music to completely transform health in certain areas. And you are talking about music as a mirror of consciousness. And so all 3 of you have slightly different angles from which you're coming in, but I'm hoping we'll come up with commonalities.
Yes.
So let's start with a transformative moment. What did, I'm going to start with Conchetta. Here, you've worked with Oliver Sacks. You've got the Oliver Sacks, and he's a father of human consciousness. In some way, he's done a lot of work in the space. What was the transformative moment that made you get into this space? And what is it that you wanted to study? And make it come to life for us. And then tell us, where did you start and where did you end up? You've been all 3 of you, we all have gray hairs, slightly darker today, but then you can, but then you've all evolved into, so give us in a nutshell why you started where you did, and where you started and where you've ended up. And that's a question I want from you.
It's interesting because I always was interested in science and music, but always saw them as parallel things, not integrated. I was a pre-med student in college, but also a trumpet performance major in college. And it wasn't until the end of my college academics that I learned that there was a field called music therapy. And luckily, I was able to go to NYU immediately to do my master's. It was during that time that in my internship, and this was my epiphany, where I was asked to play on the dementia unit. And back in 1978, people who were in the end stages of dementia was not seen as people anymore. They were seen as totally unaware of their environments, their brains didn't work, they were unreachable. And yet when I sang a song, they came to life. We all talk about that now, but back then, it was unusual to see that kind of response. So I became interested to what it was about music that was so resilient that it could bring back to life people who were deemed unreachable. And then in 1980, I had the real good fortune of working or getting a full-time job where Oliver Sacks had just finished writing his book, Awakenings, and working with people with this kind of movement disorder. He was interested in rhythm and animating the motor system in the brain. I was interested in music and memory, and what was it that excited the brain to allow these responses to come back. So he and I worked together for 35 years trying to answer those questions. And it was in 1985 that we were able to get some neuroscientists interested to help us study music and the brain. And back then we could only study, like really specific localizations of function, not the whole gestalt of what people talk about now. And we'll talk about that more. But that passion of knowing that not just song, but vibration and frequency, all of this, energizes, excites, unifies our physical and mental function in such a way that if we lose function or have some kind of inhibition or developmental delay, the organization properties of music can energize and recruit networks in the brain to make them functional. And so that's been my passion and what my institute hopes to continue to do and educate people about.
Amazing. Lisa?
Beautiful. When I was a young child, I had something called eccentric migraines, which was neurologically very eccentric and very challenging. And they put me on synthetic morphines and Demerol as a kid to navigate this pain. And at a certain point, when I was about 11 or so, I thought, I'm starting to like these drugs too much, and is there another way that I could approach this? There are 3 formative events. And so when I would start to have this experience of crazy pain, numbness in my body, and unable to see, I would just put myself in my room in the dark, and I started to just go into conversation with my body. And the first thing was for me to discern the difference between what I would call primary pain and secondary pain. The secondary pain was the pain that came from my fear of pain. And then there was the primary neurological pain. So I would go into this room and I would just try to comb that out by getting very connected kinesthetically and sensorially what was happening in my body. And I started to create different things that helped me. And one of them was to really notice that my breathing could really shift my energetical body. My coming into sorting out what the actual pain is and meeting it could help this start to end. And I would start these half-sentence games, I would say to myself. And they would start with, it's very hard that. And I would let these sentences come, and then emotion would start to pour. And as emotion started to pour, I would then again find myself moving back to central cohesion. This was the primary beginning of what started this work. And then when I was in high school, I was asked by the principal to work with a young girl who had huge developmental delays and no language and was very isolated. And the piano was always my sanctuary and place that I spoke to the invisible in through improvised music. And so I would go to her after school, and we would just play the piano and sing with no words. And then the third most formative thing was there was a young boy at that time when I was in high school who was hit by a school bus and had huge brain damage. And somehow I got on a team. There were 5 people worked on him. People worked on him for 12 hours a day. And I would go after school and he laid on his back. And each person one was in charge of this leg, one this arm, one that arm, and one in charge of the head who was the main person. And we physically crawled him. And through that crawling, I witnessed a brain of a child becoming reconnected. And that led me into my fascination with the developmental movement sequence. So I would say those were the formative things that started this. And then Connie and I did our master's together at NYU. And my placement was on the first physio psych unit in the country. And when I would do intakes with a physician there who was a Lacanian and just noticing words, my fascination was the language of resonance. And what I would call primary resonance, which is the characterological resonance, and then situational resonance, and hearing when the resonance of the instrument would shift, that would become a marker for this is interesting. So that's how it started. I worked, the process was very much started as a physical process, then went into an emotional process, then went into a conceptual construct of the work itself, and eventually became spiritual practice for me. And so that's kind of the...
Alexandre.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I grew up in Beirut, Lebanon during was called the Civil War. And this impacted so much what I studied and what I now do. I started studying music from early age and started also practicing meditation at age 14 and became interested in spirituality, in esoteric knowledge, and to understand the insanity in the world given the violence and the terror I was living in and getting accustomed to. And my parents immigrated to the States, and I studied music over 12 years at university, studied different aspects of music. And the more I studied, the more I realized that there's something else I need to know about music. There's a lot more to know. And eventually I started my own research around sound, spirituality, consciousness, and started doing fieldwork as an ethnomusicologist, traveling and studying how people use music in different contexts and what seems to be the reason, whether they're playing music in ceremonies for healing, trance, possession, whether in shamanic societies using what they call plant medicines, psychedelics or not, with invocation and so on and so forth. And this basically made me realize that the way harmony manifests in the Western world is completely different from non-Western world. And the difference here is something major we may talk about later, is that harmony, the octave in the West, has been divided into 12 equidistant half steps that made certain things possible, but also deprived us from resonance. And this is called equal temperament. So I became interested in non-equal tempered octaves and octaves that have more than 12 tones. Indian classical music, for example, has 22, Turkish, Arabic, and Persian 24, 53, up to 72, Byzantine chants. So the mathematics of the octave and the way it impacts our consciousness, the way it creates resonance and euphoric states, states of enchantment, of ecstasy, just through deep listening became something I was deeply interested in, and I experienced them, and I eventually became involved in sound therapy and sound research, and this is how I got here.
Alexandre, this is for you. So I'm curious, why and how your work took you from there into this being a mirror of the consciousness, because you really talk of sound meditation. Because I know in Indian music, in the first lesson, at the first few lessons, my teacher would say to me, "You're not here to become a virtuoso." This was a very big master I was working with. He said, "Your goal is simply to find God." That was why I was learning music. And so there was no lack of clarity about what the goal was. It was simply to go out and let God in. And that was basically, so this was getting out of the way so that you could find a much higher sound. And all the Sufi mystics actually had this as couplets, where they would say, when I was there, the divine was missing, and then the divine came in and I was gone. So you literally have lost yourself. And so this is a whole mirror to consciousness in practice. And I'm curious how you got to that and what the commonalities are between all these different traditions you've studied. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Certainly. Well, I was exposed to microtonal music in classical Arabic music growing up, but I was not interested in it because obviously rock and roll and pop music would grab you more because of the entrainment and the association and pop culture and Hollywood and all these things we were exposed to. But then I was trained in classical music and jazz, but I also played growing up pop, rock, even heavy metal when I was 16, and bluegrass and so on and so forth. But later on, when I started studying ethnomusicology and started playing and studying with Simon Shaheen, a very well-known musician, I realized these ecstatic states that one can achieve through deep listening, judicious listening, that all of these cultures relied on. For example, Sufis, when they listen to music, they go, or whether accompanied by bodily movement, chanting, or just sitting and listening, they go into a state that's called al-fana, total dissolution of the ego, where they become, one with the divine inside, and that's the ultimate point. In Indian classical music, we talk about bhava and rasa. In classical Arabic music, in Turkish, we talk about states of tarab, enchantment, euphoria, ecstasy, achieved solely through judicious, intentional, attentional listening. So, but keep in mind, we're listening to music that is microtonal, where the mathematics of sound are different, which seem to create resonance, and that's about that. And these frequencies that we have in equal tempered octave, 12 tones that are all equidistant, even to the level of cents. Cent is unit used for logarithmic measurement of sound. Don't take us there, especially that these notes that we have in the octave do not align, and they're not in tune with the tuning of the frequencies that are exhibited in the harmonic series. So this became a deep interest of mine. What is common between all of these ancient musical cultures continuing to exist is microtonality. That means their octave is equal to more than 12 tones, and these tones are not equidistant, number one. The ornamentation, the decoration around the notes, and the subtle treatment of this ornamentation rhythmically, melodically, to allow the listener to go deeper into listening, to lose the self, to let go of the egoic mind and become one with the divine within. And the last...
Sorry, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Why do you think that microtonal music with ornamentation has a different impact than basic harmonic music? What is it that you found in the way that works and affects the brain? Because if you look at it, a lot of the basic, like harmonic music has also, I imagine, produced ecstatic states in people.
Yes. Yeah, I don't mean to say that equal tempered music doesn't take us there. It does. But music in West became functional music. So harmony is basically functional harmony based on stacking up thirds to make them work. This is something that happened in the Notre Dame school in 11th and 12th century in Paris, Notre Dame Cathedral, where 4 people we know of, 2 of them, Léonin and Perrotin, started adding notes to pre-existing melody and realized consonance. Give it 2-3 centuries with Guillaume de Machaut and Palestrina and Bach, the rules of harmony became founded in the West, but it's still functional harmony. It's not the same as harmony as is exhibited in the harmonic series that we seem to look for anytime we involve any sound therapy, and these are the overtone-rich instruments: gongs, singing bowls, discs, bells, didgeridoo, shakers, rattles, that people resort to using anywhere else in the world, which is another very important commonality. That means intuitive knowledge is driving us to go there. What is there? It's a non-ordinary state of consciousness, letting go of inhibitions, and like in Indian classical music and Turkish, Persian, Armenian, so on, listening is participatory. You're supposed to comment, and there's hand gestures and a stock of words and expression and bodily movement that show to the musicians instantaneously how they're being moved, and not just an applause at the end of the symphony, not between movements, at the end of the string quartet or piano sonata, whatever's going on. So this impulsiveness and being uninhibited is what music wants us. It's to get out of your head.
It's interesting that you say this, because it reminds me just of an incident that happened, in fact, very early in my life with this master, when I'd gone for a class. And a class is normally an hour and a half, or sometimes 2 hours, depending on what the master wanted to do. And I went into the class, and typically in the class, there's the tonic scale. Are you all familiar with the tonic scale in Indian music? Which is basically whatever your voice level is. It might be an A. For a woman, it's typically an A. G sharp, whatever, A sharp, whatever the tone is. My tonic scale was an A. So I was sitting with the A and the 4 notes of it, which is the low A, the 5th, and the A. And that's what you keep doing, and you're supposed to start and steady your opening note. It's a long breath, and you steady the opening note. But of course, I was coming straight out of a bunch of meetings, and my master didn't know any of that, but I was very respectfully doing these notes. At about 10 minutes into this, my master said, "You are really not here." I was closing my eyes and I thought I was doing a pretty good job. He just said, "We have the next hour and a half. I don't want you to sing any other note except this note." So I have 4 notes on the tanpura, which is the drone, and it's going da 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 da. So that goes on, and I'm literally doing 1.5 hours. It was actually a little less than that because he had he'd watched me for about 10 minutes in this horrible interaction. But something happened to me in that, around the 30-minute point. The first 20 minutes I was very irritated. Oh God, I would have liked to have learned this. Lots of thoughts went in. But then he was not going anywhere. I couldn't go anywhere. Suddenly I dissolved. There was not me. There was the resonance. Suddenly I was in the point of the music, and there was no body. There was no anything. I was still. I was perfectly still. And by the end of it, now when I sing, I spend 15 minutes trying to find that space, because then the rest of the music takes off in a very different way. And that kind of resonance is where the body, everything dissolves. It's a very, very profound. If any of you haven't tried it, just one single note. You can't shortchange the time. It doesn't take much effort. We could do that now, we don't have the hour. You were going to make a second point.
Yes. So basically, this is what I call shifting the noise to signal ratio. If we are singing, even just humming, when you're humming, you're experiencing the sound of your voice through bone and tissue conduction and not only the auditory. And this calms down all the activities, the noise in the brain, and quiets the mind. And basically, that's the noise. And signal is being present here. The problem with the human mind is that it's always chatting, and it has different characters and personalities and archetypes. And it revolves around addictive thoughts, shame, anger, resentment, self-victimization. So music seems to be a very powerful tool to disconnect us from the part of us that is engaged in having a conversation with itself and judgment. And it's about being here now. Music always quiets the mind. Yeah.
I'm curious, Conchetta, whether that kind of principle is applicable in all the work you're doing in memory, and not just with memory, but even with movement.
Sure, there's so much to that. You know, I'm listening to you and about the different scales and different frequencies in music. And, you know, all of us have our personal music or environment that we grow up in. And so as we develop, our brains become accustomed to certain sounds and stuff like that. But what we do, something in music therapy that we do all the time, is try to improvise with a client and get them to be present in that moment making music, because when somebody is engaged in that sound and really not focusing on doing the sound, they're just becoming that music making. It's almost like when you're in the flow. We know from neuroscience that when that happens, the part of our brain that is self-monitoring shuts off. And so we're in this flow state because we're now engaged in the sound itself. And it allows us to be free of all this brain chatter. Kids with ADHD, people who have depression, people who have had a stroke and think they can't move, when they get in that zone of making music without thinking about it and experiencing it, it turns on or synchronizes functional aspects of the brain that allow this feeling of peace and wholeness in that moment.
Does that happen with memory, like memory-challenged people as well?
People who have severe memory loss probably feel a sense of peace because they're connected to another person, especially if it's an interactive music making. It's belonging. I've had people with end stages of dementia actually singing sounds with each other, even though they didn't know the words. Right. So sort of improvising music. And somehow when you look at their faces, you realize they recognize each other, that they're a group. So even without cognition of language, the sense of connection and doing something with somebody that's meaningful is still really possible. And I think we forget that, because in the basic sense of who we are, we're connected through sound and vibration, even with the environment. And now we have some science that can tell us how and why that happens. But I think as clinicians, we see this in different aspects of both music, formal music, Western, whether it's Eastern, Western, our traditional uses of music, but then the sheer resonance of how those frequencies affect the body. too.
Now, Lisa, that leads straight into something that you do a lot with, improvisation. So what, we are talking about getting out of the way, and we're all touching on this in different ways. What are your thoughts on that?
I would talk about that nonverbal singing. It's our first language. We don't really go into speech language until a year in, and at that point, very often children kind of let go of their other aspect because they're so into words. But I do these workshops and trainings all over the world, and the language of nonverbal singing everywhere is the same language. And so this idea of what it is to really, one of the first games we play, we'll say something true, something that is true right now, no words. And at first people are kind of, what do you mean? And then the second game we'll play is something that you need to say to someone, in the room or not in the room, in the world or not in the world. It's something that you need to say, no words, and starting to really give voice. And that is a very primary voice.
You want to do that with the group here?
Well, we could, we could do an imaging. If you wanted to close your eyes, you could. If you're not comfortable, you could not. But I would just give a couple of images. And so the first thing would be, can you imagine being in a room, a beautiful room, and there's a large piano, and there's great windows with much light coming through, and someone has said, okay, let's start by doing a stretch yawn and feeling your feet and the roots and feeling how the top of your head is being drawn up and starting to do these stretch yawns with long tones. And now the person is a person sitting at the piano, and she says, well, let it go there. And the long tones start to move into music. And the person at the piano is listening and finding what is the foundational, fundamental tone. And they start to rock through that tone. And all of a sudden, that person in the middle of the room just starts to really sing. Full body, full heart, full-souled singing. And the light in the room gets brighter. And the singing starts, and it builds, and it builds, and then all of a sudden it comes down, and there's a huge sigh, and we know that that is finished. And what is that experience? And what is it that is keeping you from that experience? What is the language of music? If you imagine inwardly right now, it is something true that you need to say, or it is something that you need to say to someone in the world, not in the world. It is something you need to say to the world or to the invisible. Can you imagine what that sounds like, and to inwardly just hear it? And all at the same time, we're just going to inwardly hear what it is that we need to say that has no words to it whatsoever. And I'm going to start to inwardly imagine, and maybe you will too. Beautiful. And we start the practice always with learning, first clearing the body instrument, and then learning how to let the music horse take you for a ride, learning how to surrender and let the singing sing you and what that experience is. And then if you work with me for very long periods of time, like the students at NYU, once we've really learned how to surrender, then we slowly learn how to craft while we are surrendering. Non-verbal language. I can tell you something how do I feel? You understand that? Everyone understands that. It's the same language. We all have the same language. Yeah.
But take us from there to the neuroscience of healing. I mean, just as we're looking at all of these sounds. So we've spoken about different sounds, not just you. I'd like to hear, particularly, maybe start with you, Alexandre.
Right.
You know, we've used many, many terms here. We talk of song, we've spoken about frequency, we've spoken about, collective sounds, there's collective singing. So if one could, what do different sounds do to different elements of the body, to the nerves, to the mind? I mean, and I really am looking at the technical side of it, the scientific side of it. We've got the spirit side. We know you need to get out of the way to reach something much bigger than yourself. But what physically happens, like whether it's in the research that you've done or with memory, with any patient, what is the role of rhythm? Can you take different sounds and the role of silence? Because the sound of silence wasn't a trivial term. It really is a sound. So talk to me about the different sounds.
So when we listen with intention to just listen, there is an act of meditation and presence, and that is the most important part. And as we know, meditation is not about stopping the thought process, it's about not pursuing the thoughts that emerge haphazardly and make something out of that. That's the story, the mythos. It often goes back to something happened in the past, which is what we call post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress injury, more suitable. So we lack the presence. When we sit and listen to music, the music wants to invite us to fall into it and lose the self. And when that happens, we establish a state of mindfulness or contemplative state or meditative state. I'm not using them interchangeably. They're different modalities and gears, if you will. But this is where we step outside of the thinking mind, and we can lose sense of space if we really transcend. And this is where the parietal lobes shut down, the level of activity in the parietal lobes that give us the feeling of space and time and sometimes identity. When we go into flow state as a listener or musician, it could be a dancer as well. And some people report missing time, that they were not here anymore. There's a state of coherence, there's a lot happening. First of all, we don't fully understand what goes on in the auditory cortex. This is the part of the brain that processes sound. We know so much about other parts, but this is really one of the most convoluted and abstruse things to understand. But at the end, the acoustics that we're listening to, this physics of sound, is entraining us into becoming someone else. There's everythingness and nothingness. We lose the egoic mind. And that's the ultimate point. And depending on how we're being entrained by the music, whether in a holy house, accompanied with incense and bell, church bell, which is harmonics, like a gigantic singing bowl, and candles, and maybe profuse ornamentation, like in Greek Orthodox Church, this is all entrainment. Entrainment is allowing you to go into mental, emotional, spiritual state induced by sound. And sound is always the number one tool that we use, whether we are using it in a film, in a commercial, in the holy house, at a party, sports games. So there are different ways that music can entrain every part of the body, and even the cells on microscopic level, submolecular level. And actually there's a wonderful study by Penrose and Hameroff about the microtubules seem to exhibit resonance, quantum vibration, when the person is being subjected to music like Indian classical music, which is non-equal tempered, or could be anything else. That means we are created, even on the microtubule levels, we are the tiniest structures. This is 2 to 3 nanometers wide. There's a quantum vibration. That means we are built to be affected by acoustics. And acoustics is the number one power that shapes consciousness, and this is why humans use it all the time. What happens in the process
of create... I'm just going to interrupt you for a second before you say that. When someone sits down with a piece of music, does it have to be something that they want to listen to?
Well,
No, because because you were talking so beautifully about how you can move into a different state. So is this something you can will on people? So let's say you've never heard Indian music in your life, or I'm going to use heavy metal. I mean, well, let's stay with microtonal. Or makamat music. If I've never heard or not that familiar with it, if you give that to me, will I reach those states? What are the preconditions?
very, very good question. There needs to be, very briefly, and then I'll...
No, take your time. Go
yeah,
into this. This is important.
There needs to be some transmission, some awareness. And this is why pop music is the way it is, because it's catchy, it's simple enough that almost anyone can make sense of it, but then there's another track, another hit. So these sophisticated musical cultures need some tutelage, like jazz. A lot of people hate jazz because they don't know what's going on in it. But if you sit down with them and explain what goes on, in the melody that's played in the beginning of the theme, and how improvisation works, and the function of the horns and the rhythm section instrument, then the person starts to have some guide rails to that. They know how to fathom. And by fathoming, they can get out of the way. I'm not saying that the listening experience has to become intellectual, no, but to relate to something, to dissolve. And that is really an important factor. Otherwise, it may happen, they may go with it or not. Intention, will, awareness are very important keys. So knowledge here is the ultimate power for transcendence, because the egoic mind is unbeatable. I think we all know this much.
Conchita?
Yeah. I wanted to mention, we're talking about like sound and how people experience it, but you may not realize that when a fetus is developing, by the 5th month, the auditory system is already developed and starting to process frequency and what those sounds are. When the child is born, people who studied language development, when the child is born, they could process a full range of frequencies. Right. In auditory. As they experience the environment around them, the brain learns and starts to fine-tune sounds in the environment that make them feel good, that provide a sense of language and understanding. And as that fine-tuning happens, they lose that broad spectrum of understanding. However, our cells in our bodies are frequency receptors as well. So on the cellular level, some of these frequencies affect us very deeply. On the neurologic, on the cognitive level, how we respond to music is really based on our experience from birth on, and how we form associations to those sounds, whether we find them comforting, interesting, stimulating. However, if you grow up with only one type of music, and all of a sudden our experience to a foreign sound, like Eastern music or ragas or something that you don't understand initially, but then you feel something in those that resonate with you, and you let yourself experience it, then your brain changes too, and you start to understand it. But I think we start up as a blank slate, open to every frequency that we could process, and as we develop and live and have these lived experiences, then we fine-tune our associations to that music.
So can I ask you, in fact, today I was reading something which said that lots of pregnant women, when they listen to music, of course, there's a Mozart effect that they play Mozart for the babies. And then a lot of pregnant women, if they listen to a lot of music, it releases oxytocin, but it changes something about the brain structures. Do you subscribe to both those theories?
I know people who do research. What happens is when the mother's listening to this music, if it makes her feel comfortable, she's actually more relaxed. And so the fetus is experiencing less stress. And so it's not so much the music per se, it's this connection of being in harmony with the mother who's now relaxed and feeling that she's providing something healthful.
But why does Mozart make babies smart?
So I'll tell you the origin. I know the origin of that story. Because Fran Rauscher and Gordon Shore, Fran was a doctoral student who was studying music's effect on cognition. And she wanted to see whether listening to music in the background would have an effect on students. And so she and her boyfriend were listening to some music, and they found this Mozart double piano piece that they thought was really nice. It had nice regular sounds to it. And she had that music playing in the background while students were doing the paper folding task, as opposed to something else that they were either listening to noise or whatever. She got really great results, that people who had the music playing in the background were able to do this paper folding task faster. Well, the music industry got very excited about this because they were trying to build the fact that music education was important. And the Mozart effect became their quote or term to excite that. And then actually there was this whole fight about the Mozart effect because
some very high streaming numbers for Mozart at that time. Not streaming, even I think people were buying CDs
so,
at that
so that
time.
was, but then subsequent research actually showed that what happens, and you mentioned this, that when people are listening to music in the background, or very regular type music without sudden jumps or whatever, that it actually distracts the brain from noise. So when people are doing a task, they can easily get confused if their brain is overthinking or if they're, have lots of voices in their head, distracting them, whatever, which kids tend to do when they're taking an exam. So having music playing in the background actually absorbs that noise because it distracts the brain from extraneous things so they could focus. And so when they've done other tests, they actually found that having music in the background can help.
Both of you raise an interesting issue, and I'm sure, Lisa, you've got very similar thoughts to that as well, which is that when you expose young people from, everyone from a very young age into different forms of music, your vocabulary insight, not even your spoken vocabulary, but your mental vocabulary exponentially increases. Because, I know for me, we only had 2 radio stations and there were no genres of music. You just heard whatever was playing in the radio. And it completely, your understanding and the language itself. Like, for example, the Thai language has got so many syllables. And, ta, ta, da, da, na. And, which is completely incomprehensible in the English language because, all of these micro differentiations in the sound itself, which make for a very acute listening and learning approach. So I'm just curious, if you were advocating, if one were getting prescriptive, would we say that, look, every child and every young person whose brains are still growing, some of our brains have stopped a little bit, but then, we would really enable neuroplasticity of the brain by feeding them all of this.
In fact, when you were talking about language, there's been some interest in teaching children music without teaching them music. Like letting kids play and improvise with music and play music and improvise with professionals. And the idea is that we learn to speak before we learn grammar and before we learn the rules. And if we were to learn music that way, by basically improvising with professionals, we become so versed in making music. And it could be a broad spectrum of what that music is. But it would free us, and then we could learn the language or the rules later on. But we tend to do it backwards, which is really a shame.
On that same topic, when we're talking of different sounds, I'm curious about rhythm. Because rhythm is a very important part of music. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about tones and frequencies. How does rhythm fit into this?
I just want to respond to a couple of things that Connie said. The child starts making every single sound that can be made, and depending on what's reflected back, all the rest goes away. And we know that when we learn different languages, you can watch the brain scans that every language fires the brain in different ways. So access to music, I'm sure, also fires the brain in different ways. One of the things that interests me is something that I call landscapes. What is the action of the singing body? And what is the order? That this work is about coming into what is happening. It's about coming into location and into locating oneself into one's body, the many levels of the body, physical, energetical, emotional, conceptual, what it is to land in the body, what it is to land into impulse. into longing, then what it is to land into relationship with other, then what it is to land into the essentials of music, the essentials, what it is to land into tonal space, and what it is to land into temporal space. So I could talk a little about tone and time. In training in this work, you study deep phenomenological studies of interval, of the nature of time, oneness, two-ness, three-ness, four-ness, five-ness, six-ness, and of resonance and the physics of sound. And that becomes your toolkit. And depending on what's needed in the moment, you pull it up. If you understand the psychology of humans as being on a very wide spectrum, for some people who would classically be considered on the psychotic expanded part, you're trying to tune the radio in, you're trying to bring focus into the moment, and rhythm does that. Rhythm, time, is about matter. It's about matter and organization and closing, whereas vowel work or open vowel work connects us into the infinite. And so, depending on what's needed in the moment, I have a little poem about tone and time, I could say, which is tone, like a pebble dropping into water. Tone is the rippling of waves through this ocean of air. Our ears translate those ripples, those undulations, into our experience of tone, self-perpetuating, activating trees of overtones, reverberating scaffoldings unfurl on the vertical plane as they rise and narrow to one pointedness. Time unfurls on the horizontal plane. We mark it with each step, each breath, each sunrise and set. Time transforms matter. Accordion time expands and contracts, accelerating as it moves towards one pointedness.
Okay, thank you.
Can I talk about the rhythm too from a
go ahead.
From a neurologic point of view?
Go ahead. I would like to hear that.
Because when Oliver and
I'm particularly interested in that context with Parkinson's.
Exactly.
Because
Right.
When I saw a Mark Morris workshop with
beautiful.
rhythm
Dance
and
with
with
Parkinson's.
dance and
Yep.
rhythm, and they spoke about dramatic changes in Parkinson's.
that
I'd
was
like you to
Oliver
address
and
that.
Dr. Sachs and I, obviously he had seen rhythm and how music could animate people with post-encephalitic type of Parkinson's. But when we was talking to neuroscientists back in the 80s, they got excited about auditory processing of rhythm because they were looking at cellular communication and the way the brain encodes information. And it was basically on-off signals, and so rhythm has a pattern. Our brain works in patterns because it's a pattern processor. That's how we learn things. And so they saw this synchrony or synergy between auditory processing of rhythm to how the cells actually form information and structure and memory. Now, when we think about music, we think about tone, but our auditory system is also processing the on-off pulses of the rhythm of music. And that on-off pulse is actually driving circuits in motor areas of the brain, like the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, to turn on and get aroused and stimulated by that auditory rhythm. People with Parkinson's, people who've lost some dopamine, can't turn that on themselves, and that's where they get stuck. The internal process of moving has been damaged for them, but if an external signal is presented, it allows that to bypass that self-initiation and turn it on for them. And so when you have a very strong rhythm, you see the synchrony of motor function that allows the person to move freely and to synchronize in step with that rhythm. And that'll sustain as long as the music's playing. Oliver used to use a quote from T.S. Eliot, "You are the music while the music lasts." However, if the person continues to experience and is able to self-cue by mentalizing the rhythm, they can actually continue to enable themselves to walk through just thinking about the rhythm, because now they have this pattern processor that is driving their motor system.
I'm
So people with
curious, yeah.
stroke, people
Okay.
with Parkinson's, kids with developmental delays who are sort of uncoordinated and then their balance is off, you can actually improve how that motor system communicates with each other through very rhythmic type exercises and build up that foundation for organized
I'm curious
movement.
whether it's rhythm always involves physical movement or whether rhythmic chanting, for example, could have the same effect in the mind.
it's rhythm,
and
it
I'm
is,
just
yeah.
curious from both of you, what you think. What is the value? I mean, and I guess I'm going and digressing into this whole topic of rhythmic repetition, whatever that is, whether it's chants, because many traditions have that, when you do it endlessly. What does it do to the neurological function of?
Well, it creates entrainment. Actually, let me take apart entrainment because maybe not everyone may understand what it means. So if you're watching a film and your focus is on the dialogue and the cinematography and all of that, music in the background entrains you. Music communicates to you something that the director cannot communicate, or the person who wrote the script. And so it anticipates, it communicates emotional state. If you're listening to, let's say, rock and roll and certain BPM, you start to tap your foot, that's entrainment. Something outside of you is making you emulate that. Music in the holy house entrains you to go inwards. So that's what I mean by entrainment. So when we are chanting something and there's repetition and a certain level of minimalism, so very basic things that are being repeated, this induces a state of euphoria, of ecstasy. Again, we are disconnecting from the part of the mind that is telling the story, the mythos. And that's where the problem is. This is what psychiatry is trying to treat, but with drugs, unfortunately. There's no healing if we keep on taking drugs, just momentary. But there's a natural way of healing, which is understanding the nature of what the mind goes through and what creates the pain and suffering, and even the addiction to suffering and pain. It gets really convoluted here. No one talks about that. The number one thing that ails human being is our addiction to pain. And it's not being labeled like that. So music gives us a chance to exit that by directing the attention and intention, the will, onto something. And the larger the group is, the more powerful the entrainment becomes, and it creates some sort of egregor. I don't know if you know this term, it's a wonderful term, E-G-R-E-G-O-R-E. Egregor is a mental state. It's a state of unity. It can be negative and positive. Like, for example, you're stuck in traffic or driving in Manhattan in rush hour, everybody's nervousness and the anxiety wanting to get there on time makes you start to drive like them. That's an egregor. It's almost parasitic, but it can also be positive. And this has been studied with transcendental meditation at Harvard, how if the group is larger of meditators meditating together, the effects are bigger. So we don't really understand fully what goes on in the brain, but it's a form of entrainment, but the attention is being placed onto something, and that creates a unity. So an egregor can also create anything that a group of people is focusing on, something mental, emotional, spiritual, and take them beyond the nature of the self, beyond the egoic mind, out of their head and going inwards. And this effect actually becomes amplified when you introduce psychedelics, like in shamanic societies.
Like ayahuasca.
Yeah, ayahuasca, peyote, iboga, mushrooms. I mean, human beings for thousands and thousands of years have practiced these things. A lot of governments ban them. That's questionable. I think they want you to take different drugs, not these drugs. Or the legal drugs that are harmful, like alcohol and nicotine and sugar. So what these do, for example, if you're taking something like ayahuasca that is based on DMT and beta-carbolines, DMT, psilocybin in mushroom and psilocin, etc., come from a specific family of psychedelics called tryptamine. And when you're on tryptamines, they amplify the auditory cortex. They amplify the effects of the music and makes you become one with the divine. I know this from a direct experience. One of the most profound experiences that I had in my entire life that taught me more about music, spirituality, you name it. Whether playing music, composing, attending, listening, studying, that one moment in an ayahuasca experience, I went into a state of complete ecstasy, but divine love, cosmic magnitude of love, and harmony took me there. I became, there's no word to describe that, I became one with harmony on a submolecular level. There was absolutely zero notion of who I was, what I was on, and where I was, and why this is happening. I was one with everythingness, and that everythingness was harmony and love combined.
Right.
And that one experience changed my entire life. So this is what people seek in shamanism, but not just the healing experience. It's also revealing, it's empowering, it's educational, it's rehabilitative, it's regenerative. Humans intuitively created something called shamanism, which is the art of using music, sound, and speech, and specific psychedelics. I argue that they don't have to be from a plant or fungi. They can also be created in labs, because there's plenty of research on LSD, ketamine, and MDMA. By the way, if you're not aware, this is a very, very hot topic now in science and psychiatry, how to use these real medicines, and it's flipping psychiatry upside down.
Yeah.
So what these substances that humans resort to intuitively is to become one with the Logos, one with the divine. The Logos is the name of so God. This is ancient Greek philosophers and mystic Christians called the Logos, which is the system that God used to create the world. Okay?
No, but
that
it's
is
interesting,
fields
though.
of phenomena, patterns.
The deep meditations, like I did a 10-day Vipassana, and I had exactly the same experience.
Yeah.
And that was, so I think, well, I don't know whether it's legal to argue for substances in this forum or not. If not, if it's not legal, ignore it. But whatever is, but there's a lot of discussion happening about this. There's lots of, Netflix is full of shows about it, And so leaving that, deep, meditation essentially gets you out of the way. So I'm just going to, in the interest of time, because, I could listen to them forever. I just want to, the two questions. Now, we're all here, so we don't have any babies here, but there's some different age groups, right? So if you were just dealing with two different age groups, the very young and the older, people that are older, and let's not deal with the troubled groups yet, whoever challenged in any way. Let's just deal with the two. If there's one thing you would have each of the groups do, one kind of music you would listen to, one kind of music, something that you would have them do, to just kind of have a healthy exercise for the brain, to make us all feel better, what would you recommend? What would each of you say? Short answers for that, and then I have one last question before we turn it to the audience.
Short answers.
For the young and for the older.
No difference. Understanding, having your view of how you understand a human being, not really a difference. And one of the primary platforms of my work is developmental movement sequence, and what it is at the beginning of each round to move through the developmental movement sequence, physically, breath, and with sound. And then once you've moved through it, which is a long process of finding where you get stuck, and then using that as a doorway to go into, start to clear out old things that are stuck. Then once moving through that developmental sequence, and then going into a singing of what is true or what you need to sing, and then moving into a gratitude is a very potent practice.
So, but I'm going to stop you there for a second. For those of us that can't come and take a course at Tisch to do this, you have to give us a practice. Give us an idea of what we could do. Any of you can answer this, by the way. What would you tell us to do at home, on our own? Is there a piece of music? I mean, obviously, now we've figured out that Mozart's overrated for the children. So leave that aside. No, but maybe, what is it that we should, give us a simple, I know I'm trying to boil the ocean here.
Go onto your chair first thing in the morning and feel into what is happening, and feel your location in relationship to your body and your breath and the miracle of this world, and allow yourself to sing without words what is happening. And move from that into singing without words, an expression of gratitude.
Okay.
I used to wonder why people sit in their spiritual practice and do gratitude, 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 gratitude for hours. And there are studies, since people are liking studies, that there's only one thought that changes the construct of your brain, and that is gratitude. And long periods of gratitude build dendrites and connections, and the auditory nerve connects all the aspects of the brain. So just
silent gratitude, singing gratitude.
both.
Okay.
I mean, I do
Connie,
singing
what's your
gratitude.
answer?
For me, it's so hard because I work with people with disabilities, but I would just ask them or see how they respond to music. So whether it's a young baby, the sounds that they make and how they respond to sound, and if it's a healthy adult, how they respond to music. And we probably, if I don't know them, we would probably just be making it and creating it in the moment.
So would you be creating a diverse playlist?
No, I wouldn't be even talking about music like songs, because I don't know until I know who that person is. If I'm working with somebody, and I'll answer it because I need to, if I'm working with somebody with a disability, I need to know what their lived experience with music is and how I'm going to use that music to help them attain whatever quality of life in that moment means. So if it's rhythm, it's for somebody with Parkinson's, you know. If it's somebody with Alzheimer's disease, it's probably a personal song, a piece of music that encapsulates their sense of self. And so I have to know who the person is. And if I don't know who they are, we play music together until
I
find out.
Alexandre.
Yeah. To be on the safe side, I would not play music that people would know, but rather play music coming from overtone-rich instruments like singing bowls. Nowadays, has been going on now for 10, 12 years, sound healing and sound bath is a thing. It was always around, but somehow became more popular. Why? Well, we're lacking harmony. We need positive entrainments, and humans do this. They gravitate toward things that are really needed with the age of information and then multitasking and all this noise that is in our head. So I would play singing bowls to be on the safe side.
You happen to have a little. Would you all like to hear a little sample of a 2-minute sample of singing bowls?
Just 2 minutes.
Do you want to play that?
Let me create the context for it. So what you're listening to in this singing bowl track, short track, 2.5 minutes, is a segment from one of my recordings. I'm playing here several bowls that get along well based on measured frequencies and harmonics. And harmonic series is the place where harmony comes from. It's a series of infinite frequencies bound together by a series of infinite mathematical ratios based on the multiplication of the fundamental frequency. And this series exists to give us what we call tone color, the timbre. So that gives us the sound, the difference between the sound of a flute versus the same note played on a trumpet or a violin. What it is giving us the difference is the concealed harmonics, which are based on 4 properties related to construction of the instrument. The size of the instrument, metal that the instrument, or material, the shape of the instrument, and the method that we use to play the sound. And humans play these instruments together to create music. Now here, they're only singing bowls, and I'd like you to listen to them with eyes closed, but just remind yourself to listen, not to intellectualize, not to analyze. If you drift away, just come back to pure listening. Frank, please, if you can. So here you have pure harmony in training you to remind you of the harmony that exists within us. And the power of silence is not that it's absence of sound, it's the absence of you with the mental chatter.
So there's one last question but very short answer, because I want to turn it over to the audience. Because this begs so many questions. If we had no constraints and we could really invest in one project that would advance the cause of sound as a healing, as a true medicine. I don't mean it for ill people, but we're all ill in some way, I guess, If we could use sound as a therapy for all of us, what is that project? How can different constituents come together? What would that look like? You can confer among yourselves, but give me a very short answer. I'm looking at the time.
For me, it's about a research into this process, which I've dedicated 50 years of my life to really go deeper into documentation and research and into making available trainings, 3 levels of trainings, 1 level for educators with young children, 1 level for singers and artists, and 1 level for therapists, and making that possible so that it is able to be carried on once I decide to step out.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm thinking because it's so interesting. We heard about how important music is, and I think there's enough information and enough interesting groups pushing for better recognition of the importance of music in our lives, whether it's from music in healthcare or music in development. So I think the understanding that this is important is getting out there. If I had lots of money and if we had convergence of lots of people, no restraints, it's educating people to start experiencing music and opening that up from before birth, just to recognize how important that is and not make music just be this organized thing, because that's how we learn music. We learn it as an organized thing that we have to be professional to do. But we know now that we are vibrational musical beings, and that music organizes us and allows us to be community and allows us to share in the ways that language really doesn't. And in fact, the origins of music come out of that. So if we could unite everybody who's studying either sound, vibration, music therapy, music medicine, neuroscience, and continue to publicize and enrich the people who make policy or make it possible for everybody to have access to these experiences, that would be wonderful to me.
We are music.
Alexandre?
Yes. It would be a multidisciplinary scientific research that involves neuroscientists, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, music therapists, sound therapists, to explore resonance as the future medicine, focusing on meditation, mindfulness, contemplation with music, sound, and for those who are ready with psychedelics, because psychedelics are not for everyone, meditation is. Why? We seem to be species with trauma and species with amnesia. What I've learned over the years working with people is that people who are traumatized, they mishandle their power, they lose agency, and they start to use their time, energy, and money to create self-harm and create harm to others. And we have become that. They say, well, the human being is evil. I don't think we're evil. We become evil when we are traumatized and have not been helped with this. We lost so many things, our connection to the real God within, to nature, the balance between the inner feminine and masculine, and the balance between gnosis, embodied knowledge, knowledge of the heart, experiential knowledge, and episteme, intellectual knowledge. And we lost harmony and love, and we are in search for these two things.
From your mouth to someone's ears, God's ears, yeah.
Shifting from the theory of resonance, shifting out of the theory of hierarchy and what's good and moving into the theory of resonance, which understands we are all connected.
Yeah.
And
Got it.
moving from judgment to discernment, to real conscious discernment.
I'd like to turn it over to the audience for questions. I don't know how much time we have. Rachel? Introduce yourself. Is there a microphone? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Rachel Farrow. I'm a singer and a music all-around person. Hi, Lisa. Well, first is just a comment, which is that I think for me, experiencing one of the times I've most experienced that sense of losing oneself completely and experiencing bliss was with a Western form of music, which indeed is tempered, which was singing in a black church, singing God, and even listening to it. I think that was some of the strongest experience I've ever had. And that kind of brings me to what Chandrika kept bringing up about rhythm, because almost word for word was what I was thinking about and asking. And I think that rhythm is something that's innate first, and Lisa said matter, because it starts with our bodies, right? Our heartbeat is rhythm, our breath is rhythm, our walking is rhythm, and then that little skip into dance, right? When we have that moment of losing ourselves. So I would be curious to hear a little bit about the neurological, and what you said about how in Parkinson's, that's so important. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that and how rhythm we've talked a lot about tone and harmony, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about rhythm and the science.
Sure, I'll be happy to answer that. You know, our whole bodies are rhythmic. And I mean that on a cellular level, because when there's disharmony or illness or disease in our body, it's when those frequencies, the way the cells talk to each other, get disrupted. So when we talk about arrhythmia, heart arrhythmias, the heart is out of rhythm, right? There are scientists who actually study the rhythmic patterns between EEG and heart rhythms, because there's also a synchrony in how those happen in healthy people. And when there's illness, there's like an out-of-sync type of communication. Same thing with the cells and muscle communication, so everything's rhythmic. Our auditory system then drives and stimulates or maybe amplifies these internal rhythms that get enhanced by the auditory rhythm of music and sound. I mean, we can entrain, you talked about like being in the rush hour. When we entrain, those external rhythms that make us stressed are also affecting our neurologic system, because now our neurons are getting fired in a certain way that, stresses us out. So in motor diseases like Parkinson's, where there's an arrhythmia in the way the neurons that produce dopamine get disrupted and aren't producing as much, as those cells get stimulated externally through rhythmic pulse, they're actually pushing those cells to produce dopamine. And so they get this little rush to the point that they're able to move. You see it with if you're walking with somebody, it's very hard not to walk in sync with that person, right? There's been great studies now that when audiences are listening to music, there's a great research lab up at McMaster University up in Hamilton, Ontario. They have a live lab where they can actually put EEGs on the audience and the musicians, and you can see the synchrony in the EEGs of people. So with all of us even talking to each other, your brain, if you're really listening, our left side Broca's area is probably in sync and firing at the same time. When musicians are improvising with each other and not speaking, it's actually the syntactical part of the brain, the language part of the brain that is exchanging those musical notes with each other. So our whole system is based on rhythm.
Okay. Next question. I mean, Gabby, how much time do we have? I just want to make sure. We probably run out of time? 10, 15 minutes. Okay. We have two hands up. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Milagros Mercado, and I'm a TBI survivor, singer-songwriter. I couldn't say that before. My question has to do with, like, instead of popping a Zoloft or Ativan, I could just take, like, I don't know how many hertz of music would give me that positive dopamine or whatever it is to make me feel good in that moment, like to get out of that state of mind that's like bother me.
Yes, sure. I'd be happy to answer this. Well, we take Zoloft to give us a break from what's going on in the head. And we don't heal by quieting, forcing the mind to quiet down and forcing dopamine and serotonin, because SSRI are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So somehow the body is not secreting enough of serotonin, which has a hand in so many things we do: mood, attention span, reproductive system, healing the wear and tear, digestion. It's one of the most important neurotransmitters. And we run on chemicals, 3 categories: neurotransmitters, hormones, and enzymes. So I would say addressing the cause and not the symptom is what's important, to try to figure out why serotonin is low and why, if we're taking other antidepressants, serotonin and norepinephrine are low. To go into the cause and to remedy that malinvested of energy that the person is stuck, and that's what PTSD is, in replaying the old trauma in bits and pieces, or try to deal with the trauma unsuccessfully, to a point where we have to take antidepressants, anti-anxiety to quiet down, force the mind to quiet down, where we become normal, but not the real normalcy. What one can do in this case is, let's start meditating, learning meditation, movement. Is the person exercising? Is the person eating well? Are they sleeping enough? Are they listening to good music? Are they sitting and listening to music? These are things that anyone can do. And it's so easy to learn them. But the problem with the human condition is that we don't become engaged in doing something that's good for us. We become self-destructive. We lack personal sovereignty, we lack dominion, we lack agency, we lack self-prioritization and self-worth. And it spirals down. So by building a practice to distract the person from their malpractice, which is sitting and thinking about things that are not good for us, this is the addiction to pain, addiction to shame, guilt, all this mental stuff, is to give the self a break from that. And by doing that, we give the person a chance for the self-healing to happen, basically.
I just want to add to that, because I've been through both the cycles of meditation, very, very deep meditation practice over the last 26 years, and music. And when I made my first album, which was mantras, which was really syllables, rhythms, and syllables, and I'd made it for my father-in-law's 90th birthday. What do you give a man who's turning, nobody's 90 here, is it? Doesn't matter. What do you give a man who's turning 90? That was the best gift I could come up with. The thing that shocked me is it developed a cult following. You know, I'm a good singer, but that wasn't the reason it developed a cult following. The letters I got, Facebook was brand new at that time. I still have many of these emails. People would say, my son was an alcoholic, and he's been listening to this mantra. And what it was 8 syllables repeated continuously. And my son's been listening to this, and he stopped drinking alcohol. My mother, she just got over her pain listening to this mantra again and again. I couldn't understand it. I thought this was all sort of gobbledygook in the early part of it when this came up. I just said, what? I mean, are they just writing to make, they didn't know me from Adam, so this wasn't a particularly, someone handing me bouquets of flowers. But then I started to do the research, and that's what got me into this whole Vedic research. What I found is that the 8 syllables, Om Namo Narayanaya, are meant to harmonize with the rhythms of the cells, if repeated in particular ways. This was handed down, they call it the secrets handed down from 6,000 years ago. And now listening to Connie talk about the rhythms in the body, it just all makes perfect sense to me. They say that when you're going through diseases, when the body, there are three cellular regeneration processes that are happening. One is when new cells are being created. The other is the old cells that are being destroyed. In the hour and a half that we've been there, a whole bunch of many billions of cells have disappeared. And the third is the cells that are in place now, that are harmonized. So they say this is the protective armor. In fact, it's called an armor that harmonizes you while these cells happen. Now, each mantra in Vedic chanting has a purpose. And when you couple that with the ragas, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with ragas and the scales, but certain ragas, like there's a raga called Nat Narayani, which is only for depression. So when you couple, and this is the scale of research that I certainly want to do in the next few weeks, months, years, whatever, is when you can combine, because in Indian music, the people that do the ragas aren't the ones that do the mantras, because they're all very, pigeonholed and pocketed, just like we have here. Whenever I go and work with do a master class with the classical musicians, they say, I barely have time to get through my entire classical repertoire. Where do I have time to go listen to microtonal music or Indian music? Give me a break. And I think this is exactly the same problem with the masters in every one of the traditions. So we've got to bring them together, because there's power to be had in combining the tones and the microtones and the way, because certain ragas cause dissonance and certain ragas cause consonance. And the words, certain words and the syllables, Om Namah Shivaya, the 5 syllables, correspond to the 5 elements of the body. And continuous repetition is said to purify the body. All the texts say that. So we don't understand it enough, and I think a lot more research needs to be done. So my hope is that probably won't happen in my lifetime, but in some fairly quick lifetime, that there will be no need for Zoloft. Because for me, that I wasn't on Zoloft, but literally it just changed my entire being, having these mantras be part of my life. Even now, I put it on 11-time loop. So you just completely change. Yeah, I have it on, and it just plays through the night. So I have an unconscious. I'm completely in a state. I go to sleep in a state, and I'm so joyous when I wake up, however much I sleep, because it's just playing there. 2 more questions. You had your hand up.
Yeah, my name is Terry Waldo, and I'm a musician. I've been playing I'm 80 years old, and I've been making records since 1969 of ragtime and old-style jazz. And this has been so wonderful. I just want to compliment all of you for putting this together, because it's really given me so much inspiration to think about all this in different ways. But I'd like to throw in my 2 cents worth, and that is, I think when you get to good jazz, I like the 1920s style and the stuff that's basically from the black experience, in the United States. But all of that music has all of that microtonal stuff in it. And it's not that it's been numbered and saying, we're playing tone number 23, at a certain point, but it's all in there. And and that it also has the rhythmic substance to it, and so forth. This is, I'm so interested in how all of this, my music that I'm trying to do, and I've discovered the healing powers of what I'm doing. I have an album we made years ago that I play for dying people, and it brings them to life. I've had people come out of a coma and start bouncing along with, the music that, that I have. I've been doing that. I would like to see some kind of a situation where all of us could get together and put all of this together. Because
I think that's a brilliant idea. And in fact, initially when we thought about this whole series, our thought was to kind of bring together different traditions of music and really experiment almost in a workshop kind of way that we can just see, because the experience you're talking about, I've got, if I go through my phone, I have pictures of, it's going to sound morbid, somebody dead with my CD on the dead body. So, this is crazy, because the daughter sent it to me to say this is the last thing. My mother, it's the only thing she wanted to hear for the last month. So I think there's commonalities. There's such a lot of
there's a rich commonality between what everybody is doing here.
So that you're giving us great ideas for the next thing. So make sure that you're connected with Gabby, because this is just the first this is an experiment. We were so lucky to get this amazing team together for us to talk about it. But we're just beginning the conversation. I've never been to one like this before, so that's why Gabby and I came together and said, let's really start to not just sing. We all love to sing, and I'm going to sing in 2 weeks. Please come, all of you. But we're not just going to sing. We want to talk about it. We want, look at these. They all run big classes and seminars, and we could spend hours listening to them. I could. You all could too. Yes or no? Yeah. We have another question. So great idea. We won't drop it. I hope within the next few months we'll be able to do something like that. Sounds good. That sounds like a good plan. Now, who's next? Gabby, who? Go on.
Hi, my name is Travis. I was taking notes through the entire presentation. Thank you all so much. This was really one of the best conversations I think I've heard, specifically about music. I have literally talked to people about what you're all talking about, the value of music and why it's important, and it was wonderful to see from an academic perspective, so thank you. I think I have undiagnosed ADHD, and it's one thing, music specifically, that has helped me actually concentrate. You mentioned you love metal, but a lot of other genres. I love technical heavy metal, so Meshuggah, Polyphia, Animals as Leaders, but also Miles Davis, Spanish Key, it's a great song. I also took an art class in college. I ended up drawing, we had ambient music playing specifically from the art teacher. He's like, just draw what you feel. He walked up to me after the art class and he looked at what I was drawing in charcoal and it looked exactly like the album cover. We were both deeply disturbed. So music does literally resonate and has with me. But you have spoken about the rules of music. And you've referenced Indian music several times, I believe all of you. So I think what we're talking about is scales. By the way, I'm not a musician, I'm just an avid listener. That's interesting because I believe they have a different scale. I know Chinese music does. So in the US, we tend to force 4/4, dum, 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 dum. So it's been commercialized in the United States. I guess what I'm trying to wonder is, you discussed letting children listen to music early on, forgetting about the rules. That's punk. Forgetting about the rules is the ethos of punk rock music. Just do what you feel. So I love your POVs. This was academic, however. So how do I take what you just told me, what I feel as an academic that now it works corporate, commercial. How do I take that and translate everything that you said to the general audience outside that listens to music, which is with everybody? How do I take that and translate that to the broader audience? Or rather, do you have any perspectives on that?
Good, you guys. I'll tell you what I think, which is I think we just keep making great music the best way because all of us are coming from a space. The music is not made. Everyone asks me, oh, you made a piece of music. A lot of musicians here, we said that at the beginning. Why do you make music? Can somebody just answer, why do you guys make music? Quick answers. Why do you make music? Sorry? It's a calling. What else? Why else do you make music? Feels good? Why else?
Can't help yourself.
Can't help yourself. What did you say? Connection. What else? You're not doing music to say, oh, let me show them what's my best virtuosity at this moment. Because who knows what that moment is. We all have a higher purpose. And the more the higher purposes come together, I really believe that something, but then we have to share it with the world. You've something to add to that, Connie.
No, when I was talking about how I feel like we should just let people experience music from an early age. Yeah. Because what happens, and everybody knows this, that once we define it and put an economic value on it, it becomes a structured thing. So in every generation has their popular music, and it becomes popular because enough people are promoting it. Yet all of this music has existed simultaneously throughout time. I'm sure there's been like rock, something with a beat, although rock music obviously started
But
more
I
recently.
think our thought processes are conditioned that way.
I think what happens is we learn a certain type of music and we stick to it, And it's those rules and stuff that keep us from experiencing the full value of or experience of what music is. That internally we are musical. We want to make music. It makes us feel good. Even, I mean, Milagros, there's been studies that show if you listen to a piece of music that makes you feel good, just listening to that song, that serotonin gets released. Just something that you've already learned to have a pleasurable experience
I wish
with.
music were playing all the time.
So
some music was playing all the time somewhere. We talk of music, but it's not really necessary.
No.
We don't have to be dismissive of that. You know, we can have it playing in the ethos.
But it's different for each. It's different for each person.
I would like silence, personally.
I
I never listened
mean-
to music. I love silence.
Go ahead.
Among some of the Native American nations, there is the belief that each one comes in with your essential cry. And among the Hopi, for example, each child is meant to find their cry, and they're meant to be out in the mesas in the morning when Tewa, the sun, shines up, and they're meant to cry that cry so the Creator knows you're still alive. It's a way of belonging. It's essential.
Beautiful.
And in the white world, especially, the moment a baby has been shushed, they've been traumatized.
Exactly.
Totally. That begins.
Yeah, I've often wondered about the notion of a soul sound or a cry, that everybody has their soul sound.
Yeah.
Very, very beautiful.
And in the Northwest Native way and the Coast Salish way, we, in the smokehouse, in the process of initiation, which takes 4 years, they strip away all the falseness. We're all maladaptive. We're all defense mechanisms, all of us walking here. Are essentially defense mechanisms. And when they finally take that away from you, I've been in the smokehouse where an adult person, you hear a baby's cry coming out. It's not an adult crying. You get back to the original cry. And then from that, a new identity is born. And once that cry has been allowed to move for a while, now, yes, you're being in a state, you're not allowed to sleep, you're not allowed to eat, you can talk to nobody until you become totally helpless. And out of that arises an authenticity that's not dependent upon the social structures,
That's exactly
but it's the cry of your spirit.
Right.
And eventually in your spirit, with this spirit possession, dancing, sialan.
Right.
That way, it's such a phenomenon to see.
Right.
And be a part of. But then you know there's authenticity there, there's frequency.
Right.
And what I've been noticing here in the room, the variations is if you speak, what's happening in the frequencies in the room.
Right.
I'm sure you musicians understood do
And
that.
that cultural repression of emotion. I remember being in the car when my cousin died when she was very young, and I was driving with my sister and my parents, and I was really crying, and my mother kept saying, don't cry, don't cry. And it's like, if I can't cry now, when can I cry?
When can I cry? Yeah.
And in many cultures, they have people dedicated to come to the funeral, move people to
yes.
wailers, and they're not related to the deceased person, but they
just
start
wail.
to wail and
For
cry
13
and talk
days.
about their goodness, to give people permission to cry because they're stoic in a negative way here, not knowing what to do, and that is what becomes post-traumatic stress disorder if they let it out in the instant, and sometimes includes shaking, like little kids. There's a practice around trauma release exercise by shaking, especially the psoas muscle, coming back to vibration again. We don't do this anymore. So we entrap everything. It goes into the subconscious mind, which influences the conscious mind. And this is why we have a troubled world. Because people need healing. They need love. They need attention. And no one helped them with that.
1 minute past the witching hour. It's 9:01. Thank you all. I mean, may we all find our cry, you know. A very special thanks to this amazing panel. Alexandra, thank you so much. Connie, thank you. And Lisa, thank you. And WMI, where is Gabby? You know, thank you for making this all possible and for us to come together to do this, for giving us forum. Gabby and Bryce, thanks for doing this. And thank you all for being such amazing listeners and participants. I think we could have gone on much longer, but the night is not so young. Thanks again.